And now I think that we can just begin with the conference, getting straight to the heart of our program with the first keynote speaker, which I have the pleasure to introduce you. He is Professor Manuel Herrero Sánchez, full professor of early modern history at the Universidad Pablo de Olavide de Sevilla since 2001. He has been a research fellow in several prestigious European and American institutions, such as the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, the Istituto Benedetto Croce of Naples, the Center for the History of European Expansion in Leiden University, Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, Liège University, Complutense University of Madrid, Harvard University, and Leibniz Institute für Europäische Geschichte in Mainz. His research focused on the comparative approach to the history of the mercantile republics of the Netherlands and Genoa, and on the complex constitution of the Hispanic monarchy, Europe's first transnational, polycentric, and global empire. He has been principal investigator of some very interesting research projects centered on the Republic of Genoa, on the Hispanic Baroque, and on merchant network in the Mediterranean. He is actually principal investigator of the project Repubblica Monarchica, la Monarchia Hispanica, una struttura imperial policentrica de Repúblicas Urbanas, which deals with many interactions between center and periphery, global and local, in the early modern Spanish polycentric empire. He has published several articles and books on Genoa, Spanish Empire, and the early modern republicanism. Among them, I would like to mention at least the collection Genova y la Monarchia Hispanica, 2011, edited with Carlo Bitossi, Dino Puncu, and Roggio Ben Yessef, Repúblicas y Republicanismo en la Europa Moderna, 2017, and Political Representation in the Ancien Regime, 2019, edited with Joaquim Albareda. It's a real pleasure and honor to welcome here Professor Manuel Herrero Sánchez, who will give us a lecture titled The Representation of Genoa in a Monarchy of Urban Republics, 1576-1684, from the interdependence between Genoese particulars and the Catholic monarch to the limits of the model of full sovereignty. Thank you very much, Professor Herrero Sánchez, for having accepted our invitation. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Enrico. You can hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, I share the screen. Sorry. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the member of the RISC project for their invitation, and especially Enrico Zucchi, who has been in contact with me in the last few months. Unfortunately, the meeting had to be online, but I hope to have the opportunity to collaborate in other activity of the group in the future. As pointed out now by Enrico Zucchi, the interpretative framework of the republicanism postulated by the Cambridge School, which has its clearest reference in the two volumes edited by Quentin Skinner and Martin van Gelderen, is based on the establishment of a clear dichotomies between early modern republics and monarchy. The virtuous citizen, described by Pocock, defended the common good by creating channels of political participation, vivere civile, capable of subverting the republic from arbitrary domination mechanisms that characterize monarchy, vivere libero. The absence of the Republic of Genova in this explanatory framework is based on the limited political autonomy of this republic and the strong ties that linked its ruling elite to the Hispanic monarchy. This approach converged with the 19th century liberal romantic tradition, according to which Andreas Doria's agreement with the emperor in 28 could be one of the most obvious expression of the beginning of the foreign domination over Italy, and could promote a process of oligarchization of the dynamic mercantile group of the Republic that had been the protagonist of Genoa's naval expansion during the Middle Ages, in addition to destroying the values of sovereignty and republican virtue. Republican systems are also pitched against the unitary centralizing model represented by the classical and stereotypical view of the French absolutism, but also by the Spanish monarchy, which is presented as the antagonism of the ideal of self-government. In a recent work, we have challenged this unilineal and teleological narrative. Based on the analysis of multiple actors, many of which has been marginalized in previous studies on republicanism, we emphasize the polysemous nature of the concept and the close bonds of dependence and cooperation that existed between dynastic and republican systems, which are the expression of the extraordinary degree of fragmentation and complexity of the ancien regime political structures. In that book, we laid the foundation of our current project, in which we propose an analysis of the Spanish monarchy as a polycentric imperial structure of urban republics. The Catholic monarchy was a multilateral territorial and polycentric structure with many different entangled centers that interact not only with the king in Madrid, but also with one another, thus actively participating in forging the polity. The decisive role played by local agents in the Habsburg monarchy was therefore conditioned by the fact that this imperial system includes some of the most intensively urbanized and dynamic regions of the continent. We are thus in the presence of a true monarchy of urban republic, in which the power of the sovereign was further consolidated by the foundation of new cities and reflected in the essentially urban nature of the American expansion. This explains the vitality of a political culture characterized by its republicanism, and according to which the city, with its exclusive privilege and jurisdiction, was the ideal framework for the defense of the common good. The monarchy was thus configured as a corporate and markedly hierarchical aggregate of territories, at the head of which stood the king, the ultimate depository of sovereignty. This resulted in a mixed and balanced form of government, where the body of the republic was an aggregate of multiple parts who shared the sovereignty, and each of these had not only the authority, but also the duty to contribute to the common good. The stability of the whole, therefore, did not rely on a dangerous concentration of power at the head. We are in the presence of a type of republicanism that wasn't only based on the language of virtues, but also containing a strong jurisdictional bias linked to a warranty universe based on all kinds of balances between the different social bodies. The Hispanic system was articulated by a complex network of transnational networks, aristocratic, bureaucratic, military, religious, and mercantile that circulate through different geographies, which gave the system an impressive versatility and explains to a great extent its durability and adaptation to changes. Alongside the court of Madrid, residence of the sovereign, and the various peripheral courts, which include urban nodes as Brussels or Milan, the monarchy was also sustained by a crucial role played by some of the main mercantile emporiums at the time, such as Antwerp, Seville, or Genoa. A heterogeneous and flexible space which facilitate the participation and inclusion within it of different transnational mercantile diasporas, which were able to operate without difficulty within the framework of diverse legal and monetary system, and to act as connector between dispersed territory, as well as offering a whole range of fundamental resources for the adequate functioning of the system. Among these transnational connectors, Genoese network play a prominent role. Not surprisingly, the main facet of Hispanic-Genoese relation that has aroused the greatest interest is that relating to the financial activities of its hombres de negocios. The notion of the Genoese centuries, the siglo de los genoveses, formulated by Felipe Ruiz Martín and popularized by Fernand Braudel, has become commonplace and has given rise to an extensive historiographical production. Works such as those of Carande, Doria, Neri, Carlos Javier de Carlos, Álvarez Nogal, and Canosa have shown that it wasn't possible to understand the functioning of the Catholic monarch without taking into account the determining role played by the ascentistas, who seemed to mediatize everything and on whom the entire imperial system depended. The other traditional area of analysis has been the study of the imposing presence of Genoese communities in the major cities and business places of the monarchy, and their extensive and well-coordinated network of partners and relatives, which, however, have often been analyzed from local sources. Just to mention works such as that of Ruth Pike on Enriqueta Villa, for the cases of Sevilla, or Musi, Muto, Colapietra, or Brancaccio for Naples, Traselli, Emar, and Eufrida for Sicily, or Beck or Janssens for the Low Countries. However, these studies have not been interested in providing an overall view or in studying in detail the links and differences between the different areas. In the monographic volume that I coordinate for the journal Hispania in 2005, in which we attempt to trace a diachronic evolution of the Spanish-Genoese relation during the 16th and 17th century, and in the two volumes that I coordinate in 2011 together with Carlo Vitossi, Jasmina Ben Joseph, and Dino Punkuk on Genoa and the monarchy, which the main specialists in the field participate, we underline the need to go deeper into a whole series of issues on which work has multiplied over the last 15 years. Firstly, we should highlight the impressive multiplication of doctoral theses of excellent quality that have appeared since 2012 and have been published as a book, which are about to do, or as recently going to be defended, like this one of Alberto Sánchez Camacho is going to defend in the University Institute of Florence in next January. The study of the quasi-monopolistic role played by the Genoese in the finance of the crown and on the scope and impact of the successive defaults by the crown continues to be a very fruitful area of analysis, as evidenced by the recent work of Carmen Sant and the debates between Drelichman, Both, and Carlos Alvarez Nogal on the relationship between debt, taxes, and financial crises. In the same way, the hegemonic position of its commercial network in the vast markets of the Spanish monarchy has allowed it to offer overall views such as those of Céline Dauvert, or analysis such as the already mentioned by Rafael Girón, who thought the study of the control of Andalusian hold consignment has placed emphasis on the capacity of the Republic merchant to ensure the insertion of certain marginal areas into international financial and commercial circuits. The Republic's entrepreneurs enjoy a comparative advantage over the mercantile communities, which enable them to flourish and promote in the Spanish power system without major problems. In addition to the control over the international flow of capital and their extensive network of contacts, they were also able to compete with their Portuguese, English, or Dutch rivals by possessing an aristocratic luster that had been consolidated by the oligarchic closure process that took place at the beginning of the 16th century. Their novel ancestry facilitated their social promotion by placing them in an excellent position to access the main mechanisms of the royal patronage. In order to reinforce this privileged position and to limit the competition from other business community, the Genoese articulate corporate protection mechanism as the most appropriate way to safeguard their interests and maintain their collective identity through the foundation of confraternities, hospitals, chapels, or centers of devotion or burial reserved exclusively for Genoese. A special place in this network was reserved for the consuls, who were responsible for preserving the privilege and solving any dispute that might arise within the community. The Genoese succeed in establishing an impressive network of consulates in the main cities of the monarchy, as evidenced by the recent and meticulous work of Maria Concetta Calabrese in the case of the city of Messina. Another of the most fruitful lines of work seems to have taken into consideration the acute observation of Eduardo di Grandi in his excellent study on the Balbis, when he stated that the Genoese families should be as le vere protagoniste della storia genovese, una storia più privatistica che statuale. In this respect, he stressed the need to reconstruct the way of life, habits, social practice, personal relation, and connection and friendship and cooperation between the main Genoese houses. In recent years, excellent studies have appeared based on sources stored in the Italian, Spanish, Belgian archives, such as those carried out by Carmen Sanzayan on Ottavio Centurione, or by, in particular, the excellent doctoral thesis by Yasmina Ben Joseph Garcia on the Serras families network, which will be published in book form at the beginning of the next year. For his part, Bastien Carpentier, from a social network analysis perspective, has analyzed recently the dense network of main galley owners at the service of the Catholic king, Giovanni Andrea Doria. In fact, in addition to the valuable financial service, the Genoese were irreplaceable when it came to ensuring the adequate transport of people, soldiers, supplies, cereals, and capital in the Western Mediterranean. Therefore, in the aforementioned monograph that we published in Hispania in 2005, we draw attention to the absolute lack of knowledge that we had regarding the leading role played by the private Genoese galley owners in ensuring the proper functioning of the Spanish naval system in the Mediterranean. Despite their importance, the transnational nature of the squadron and the dispersion of documentary sources explain the limited interest of historiography that has generally analyzed the problem of fleets from a localist or nationalist perspective and linked it to the equation military revolution development of modern state. Not surprisingly, the works of Thomas Kirk or Luca Lobasso address it in tangential way and focuses in the interest of the successive attempts to develop a public galley squadron similar to that of Venice. The outstanding doctoral thesis of Benoit Maréchaux, who is taking part in this Congress and who will see the light in Routledge collection in 2022, has notably filled this gap. The private galley owners were one of the most important squadrons in the Mediterranean. It was a polycentric naval system based on contracting by the Catholic monarch of private entrepreneurs. Since its creation in 1528, the squadron led by Andrea Doria had specialized in mobilizing resources between different territories of this imperial system. To these units were added what could be called the composite fleet of the private individuals of Genoa, with the incorporation of the troops under the command of Agostino and Giorgio Grimaldi, Visconte Cicalla, Antonio Doria, Berninelli Sauli, Stefano Mari, Marco Centurioni, and Niccolò Agostino Lomellini. Between 1566 and 1580, the formation always had a minimum of 24 galleys, to be reduced to about 14 and 15 at the end of the reign of Tilly II. The galley of these ascentistas were used to transport both the bureaucratic and aristocratic elite who moved between the various domains of the king, and also the contingents of soldiers and all kinds of military supplies and information from Italy to Spain and vice versa. The symbiosis between the interest of the individuals of the Republic of Genoa and the Hispanic imperial system was part, as Wouter Krause will have occasion to point out in this Congress, of the secular confrontation of the hegemony between France and the Spanish monarchy. The classic works of Arturo Pacini and the more recent ones of Matteo Sallonia have shown how the agreement reached between Andrea Doria and Charles V in 1528, which provide the basis for a solid political agreement, ran parallel to a constitutional reform intended to put an end to the confrontation between factions that had facilitated the constant foreign intervention in the affairs of the Republic. In exchange for exclusive use of the naval and financial service of its private individuals, the Spanish monarchy was to be the warrantor of the Republic's freedom and undertook to defend the Republic against any possible external attack. The effective symbiosis between the two sides of the alliance allow us to speak in Enrique Ote's word of a Spanish-Genoese imperial structure that held a hegemonic position in Europe, at least until the 1630s. As evidenced by this tapestry of the conquest of Tunisia in 1535, which depicts a curious invert map of the Mediterranean with the port of Genoa at its apex, the Republic soon became the neuralgic point of the Spanish imperial system. It was not only the key of Italy and the central hub of communication between the Italian and Iberian domain of the crown. As the natural post of the Duchy of Milan, it was the main vehicle of communication with the Habsburg imperial territories. And after the outbreak of the Dutch revolt and the gradual shift of international conflicts toward the Low Countries, it could eventually become the first step of the Spanish road, one of the main strategic of the monarchy. Despite occasional moments of crisis, such as that which occurred between 1575 and 1577, the alliance of both partners remained solid. The civil conflict between the new nobility and the old nobility, which threatened impossible intervention by France, coincided with the pressure exerted by the Castilian cities on the king to stop the massive penetration of the Genoese ascentistas into the crown's finances. The suspension of payment decree issued by Philip II in 1575 forced a member of the old nobility, who were among the most prejudiced by the measure, to reach an agreement which resulted in the publication of the new laws in 1576, which would provide the Republic with internal stability until the end of the 18th century. The following year, the general agreement reached between the king and the Genoese banker not only put an end to the desire of the Cortes to replace the Republic bankers with local capitalists, but also served to increase the number of Genoese lenders interested in making their immense resources available to the Catholic monarch. The ties between the Republic and the monarchy were reinforced, while relations between the main families of the old nobility, such as Doria, Spinola, Grimaldi, Pinelli, and Nomelin, and those of the new nobility, such as Balbin, Brea, Giustiniani, Durazzi, and Sauli, were strengthened. The monarchy indebtedness and the successive suspension of payment stimulate a profound transformation of the investment and the social status of the Genoese entrepreneur, who, in return for their loans, were compensated with all sorts of prebends and end up monopolizing the most lucrative income of the crown or local government. As figures such as Ambrogio Spinola, Marquis of the Balbases, and Capital General of the Flemish army show, the Genoese managed to increase their patrimony through the foundation of mayorazgos, the control over the best juros, or thanks to the ease with which they acquired the habits of the military orders or some noble titles. Their quality as manager, their links with the best family are their wide network of influence, encourage their entry into the government of the most prosperous cities of the monarchy. The Genoese did not only gain access to the municipal government, but also end up taking an important participation in the main consejos and juntas in the central government of the monarchy. The monopoly that they managed to hold over the control of the crown's finance generate a great deal of criticism from those sectors that accuse foreigners to be in the cause of the Castile ruin. In line with the accusation previously made by a good number of political arbitristas and economic writers, such as Tomás de Mercado, Sancho de Moncada, or Francisco Murcia de la Llana, in 1650, Francisco Martínez de la Mata concluded his aggressive plea against the Genoese with this categorical war. You have the translation on the right of the screen. El comercio y amistad fingida de Génova ha sido y es el cuchillo de España y la tiene pobre y desacreditada, porque funda sus medras, creces y aumentos en el daño ajeno, y ha sido y es la real hacienda de vuestra majestad y la de los vasallos, despojo y presa de su codicia, porque no tienen otro Dios que su interés, ni otra ley que su conveniencia. In a 1656 memorial Juan Battista Chicardo used Martínez de la Mata's text again to reinforce his anti-Genoese views. His accusation affected the totality of the king's domain and accused the Genoese of depriving the monarchy of all its precious metals and controlling trade with the Indies. El tiempo ha mostrado el gran daño que los genoveses han causado, no tan solamente a estos reinos, sino también al de Nápoles, Sicilia y Estado de Milán, que no negocian ni nadie va a dichos reinos a comprar, como lo solían hacer los que tratan de embarcar mercaderías para las Indias, porque los genoveses llevan tanta abundancia de las suyas a Cádiz y las embarcan para dichas Indias que han quitado tráfico y salida de las de España y dichos reinos y estados. This pejorative view was not, however, unanimous, as evident by the ambivalent attitude adopted by Francisco de Quevedo toward the Genoese. Like most of the Castilian arbitristas, he did not hesitate to accuse them of being the bloodsuckers of Spanish riches and America's treasures. Quevedo adopted a critical stance toward the ineffectiveness of republican government controlled by a narrow oligarchy that placed its own interest above the common good. Que la libertad reina, dijo, dado a los diablos el genovés. Tú debes de estar loco, y como no has sido repúblico, no sabes sus miserias y esclavitudes. No bastará toda la razón de Estado a concertarnos. Si el Senado repúblico se compone de muchos, es confusión. Si de poco, no sirve de corromper la firmeza y excelencias de la unidad. Génova tiene tantas repúblicas como nobles y tantos miserables esclavos como plebeyos, y todas estas repúblicas personales se juntan en un palacio a solo contar nuestro caudal, y en viéndonos abultados de caudal nos exprimen para sí. However, Quevedo rightly points out how the interest of the individual Genoese in the market acted like a gold chain that limited their margin of maneuver and tied them to the interest of the Catholic king. In the Lince de España of Faurí in 1628, he pointed out, gran parte de las victorias que os dieron aquellos estados debe vuestra majestad a la casa de Doria. ¿Cuánto importa la amistad de Génova a España? Nadie lo dice mejor que lo que cuesta. El oro y la plata llevan a Génova, es verdad, mas de allí lo pasan a emplear en posesiones, juros, rentas y estados y títulos en vuestros reinos de España, Nápoles, Milán y Sicilia. Esto quita el miedo de temer que no se retiren los asientos o nos levanten el contrato y da ánimo para disponer lo que convenga con satisfacción de obediencia encarcelada. This argument was eloquently the same as that employed by few years earlier by Andrea Spinola, one of the most critical Genoese political thinkers of the predominance of the private interest of this family involved in the lucrative financial business with the Catholic monarch, whose social rise was ultimately subordinated to the dictates of Madrid and limited the development of the fully autonomous naval policies. In a paragraph eloquently titled Arti usati dal Re Cattolico di Spagna contro la Repubblica, he pointed out la facilità grande alle compre de feude che fanno i nostri cittadini invaniti da apparenze e dei titoli, ma fatte che sono, è difficilissime cosa ottenerli senza di venderli. Gli abiti, ossia croci, si danno a furia, parendo a Sua Maestà gran guadagno per un dito di pagno rosso acquistare un suddito, anche siamo in una città libera. As this text by Andrea Doria show, the obtaining of titles, feuds, and all kinds of honors by an important segment of the Genoese aristocracy, which used to be called eminenti, caused differences within the aristocracy, which went against their theoretical unity and gave rise to a character of criticism for the existence of a dangerous duplicity of loyalty that could only benefit the Catholic monarchs. In the words of the Spanish ambassadors in Genoa, Antonio Ronquillo, the harassment of these eminenti mediators who were accused of leading a lifestyle that was not in keeping with the principle of sobriety and frugality typical of the Republican mediocritas, provoked a policy of intimidation against them. El fin de esta república es bajar a estas tres casas del príncipe de Doria, duque de Tours y marqués de los Malvases, no pudiendo sufrir su grandeza ni que haya desigualdad de ellas a las demás. In another letter sent to the following day to the king, Ronquillo point out, de esta locura en que son pocos los que no hayan caído, ha nacido que muchos se persuaden a que el príncipe Doria, duque de Tursi y marqués de los Malvases, son menos por grandes que por ciudadanos genoveses, y ha muchos días que procuran mortificarlos y que se entienda que el grado de grandeza no les hace valer nada en Génova y que han de pasar por la medida de los demás ciudadanos. The massive purchase of feuds, titles, and lands add to the privileged access to a series of honors and dignities granted by the crown in exchanges for financial services, explain why, until now, the accent has been placed on the gradual abandonment of the mercantile identity of the Genoese patricians in favor of a properly noble spirit. Far from abandoning their financial and mercantile activities, access to the fief served to diversify their income and to obtain business possibilities. As Jacques Savary point out in 1675, les Génois y ont acquis de longtemps des seigneuries dans les endroits meilleurs et les plus abondants en soi, dont ils sont les maîtres, et par ces acquisitions qui les rendent citoyens, ils sont exempts de tout droit de sortie et de douane que les étrangers sont obligés de payer, ce qui est un avantage qu'aucun Français ne peut avoir. Ainsi, quand il leur plaira, ils peuvent troubler les entreprises des achats sur les lieux en les baillant à meilleur prix qu'on ne pourrait faire. In addition, the family ties established with the most illustrious members of the aristocracy and urbanate oligarchies in the main cities of the monarchy made possible the introduction of substantial innovation in the management of manorial resources and the access to the extraction of agricultural and jurisdictional surpluses, as well as direct control over local taxation and new lending possibilities. As the portraits of Van Dyck or Rubens, in this case of the second Marquis of the Balbasas, Felipe Spinola, and his wife Jeronima Doria, show, their extensive network of merchant delegates in all the territories of the monarchy and the preservation of their ties with the mother country have made the Republic one of the main enclaves from which a series of values, cultural form, new tastes, and pattern of consumption will spread and interrelate all over Europe. As an articulating nexus of the Italian, Iberian, and Flemish territories of the crown, the small republic became the platform for the dissemination of an hybrid cultural model of a strong cosmopolitan character in which elements from the crowns or from all the crown's domains were fused together. Despite the solidity of the relation between Genoa and the Spanish monarchy, from the end of the 1580s and with greater strength from the 1620, an integrated group of government men and political authors began to emerge who, under the name of Republicisti, proposed a revision of the relation with the monarchy and the implementation of an armament project and the reinforcement of the administrative and government body. Carlo Vitossi emphasized the diversity of their origin and the lack of the unity discourse, despite the fact that they all advocate to break the golden chain that had subjected the Republic to the dictates coming from Madrid. From 1637, with the election of the Asdogo of Agostino Pallavicini, and until the plague epidemic of 1657, this group managed to monopolize the main magistrate of the Republic, and with the support of intellectuals of the importance of Antonio Giulio Vignole Sale or Bernardo Veneroso, proposed to carry out a plan of government destined to recover a glorious past in which the citizens of the Republic recovered their old freedom. By then, Andrea Spinola's more moderate approach had been replaced by a more energetic one, as can be observed in an anonymous writing, which under the illustrative title of De la necessità che ha la Repubblica di Genova di armarsi e del modo di mantenerla armata, appeared in the 1640. This text established an interesting parallelism between what happened to the Greek republics after they were submitted to the authority of Philip of Macedonia and Alexander the Great, and the evolution experienced by the Genoa following the agreement between Andrea Doria and Charles V. The pacification of the civil discord had led, in both cases, to a complete servitude and to a weakening of patriotic principle and of the cultivation of exchange of protection and wide possibilities of promotion for a minority that, attracted by luxury and graces offered by the sovereign, has distanced itself from the principle of republican severity cultivated by its elders. The only alternative was to promote a powerful program of naval armament, and like the Dutch Republic, to promote new trade routes with the Levant and the Indies, che con grande loro profitto hanno eretto le negoziazioni delle compagnie delle Indie orientali occidentali e del settentrione, che sono quelle che mantengono la loro repubblica e la somministrano le spese eccessive che hanno fatto e fanno in una guerra tanto lunga contro gli spagnoli. Nei traffici di Levante tralasceranno quelli di Spagna e per conseguenza verranno gli spagnoli a mancare di quelle comodità che cavano dal denaro dei genovesi. As Eisma Müller has pointed out, the imitation of the Dutch model became one of the axioms of the Republicisti, who appreciate their high degree of autonomy and who saw in their opulent trading companies and their powerful navy the only instrument capable of eroding the tutelage exercised until then by the Spanish monarchy. However, this international republican doctrine was soon confronted with the bitter reality. Commercial interest seems to take precedence over any kind of solidarity between republics that were fighting for control of the same markets. The Genoese attempts during the 1640 and 1650 to become independent from Madrid tutelage by implementing a program of naval reactivation and colonial expansion were undermined by the position adopted by the Dutch Republic that in 1648 had reached a peace agreement with the Catholic monarch that fostered the rapid expansion in such lucrative markets and allowed the Dutch to become the main naval suppliers of the Spanish monarchy. In the same year, the newly founded Compagnia Genovese delle Indie Orientali had to deal with the discouragement as the ship he had acquired in Amsterdam were confiscated in the port of Batavia by the Bock, which was reluctant to give up an inch of his monopoly on trade in Asian waters. Similarly, Bernardo Veneroso desired to resurrect Genoese naval power through close collaboration with the Republic of Venice against the Ottoman Empire, and through the promotion of trade in Levant was proven to be discouraging. Far from acting as allies, the republics became fierce competitors, and they even clashed over question of protocol in the same way as the monarchical system did. The claim of Genoa to see its royal title recognized was not only denied by the Catholic monarch or by the Pope, but it also did not find the expected echo in the United Province, as Stefano de Andrea bitterly pointed out from the consulate of the Republic in Amsterdam. The Dutch did not accept that the Genoese representative kept their heads covered before the Assembly of the General State. As Enrico Zucchi has recently pointed out, during the second half of the 17th century, the impulse of the model of Bodinian full sovereignty, which was consolidated in France after the failure of the Front and the arrival of the power to Louis XIV, impacted considerably in the main European republics. The death in 1650 of William II in the United Province opened the first period without a stadtholder, resulting in Thomas Meyssen's opinion in the desire to impose a model of republican absolutism that questioned the supremacy of the forms of mixed government and the balance between the dynastic component provided by the House of Orange and the republican aristocratic model of the regent elite. A model that was imposed again after the invasion of the Republic by French-British troops in 1672 and with the arrival to the power of William III. In Genoa, those who wanted to reaffirm their sovereignty and their complete autonomy from Madrid inclined to adopt a language closer to that of the prevailing dynastic system. As George Gorse will explain, the dominion exercise over the Kingdom of Corsica encouraged the government of the Republic to acquire, in 1637, the royal dignity and to appoint the Virgin Mary as Queen of Genoa, with the intention of obtaining greater international prestige. The recognition of the royal authority implying a certain admiration by the Genoese ruling group toward the authoritarian forms of government. In this context, we can understand the argument used by Anton Giulio Brignole Sale during his embassy in Madrid in 1646, when, in order to convince Philip IV of the need to recognize the royal title of the Republic, he affirmed it categorically. ¿Qué menester son aquí más consultas de ministros ni consejos? ¿No es vuestra majestad soberano señor de todo? ¿No tiene absolutísima autoridad? ¿No puede hacer lo que quiere de por sí solo? ¿No lo debe hacer cuando es tan clara la razón y las conveniencias? Por lo demás, es grandísima fineza de la real prudencia que el príncipe de cuando en cuando haga resoluciones totalmente de por sí solo para mostrar y ejercitar enteramente el brío de su voluntad y la soberanía de su poder. Costantini was right when he claimed that, in contrast to the Republican discourse maintained by Andrea Spinola, by the middle of the century, the Novatori or Republicisti spoke less or less of freedom and more of prince. By 1646, after the recent fall of Olivares and the failure of his centralizing policies, which had provoked the revolt of Catalonia and Portugal, the Hispanic monarchy was inclined to adopt a policy diametrically opposed to the one suggested by Brignole Sale, through a reactualization of the consensus with the local elites and a rigorous respect for the privilege and freedoms of each of territories and cities of the monarchy. By then, the Spanish-Genoese imperial system appeared to be under question. Despite the success of the Spanish intervention in favor of the Republic during the invasion of Savoy promoted by France in 1655, which was represented in the iconographic program designed to decorate the Salón de Reyes of the Palace of the Buen Retiro, where the relief of Genoa by the troops of the Marquis of Santa Cruz was placed on an equal level with such decisive victories as the capture of Breda, the recovery of Bahia, and the defense of Cadiz. Madrid's attempt to reach an agreement with the Duke of Savoy on the margins of the Republic, joined to the adverse effects of the suspension of payments of 1627, which showed the inability of the Republic's ascentistas to exercise in a monopolistic manner their function of the capitalist component of the whole. The efforts undertaken by the Crown to seek new financial providers among the youth converse community and the ascendancy achieved in the government of the Republic by the supporters of the revision of the relation with the Spanish monarchy culminate in a restoration of diplomatic relation aggravated by the finale issues, the diplomatic altercation motivated by the passage of the Queen Mary of Austria in 1649 by finale instead of the port of Genoa, escalated in 1654 with the confiscation of the goods of the Genoese in the Italian domains of the Crown. However, the disastrous defect of the plague of 1657 and the failure of the sovereignist measure put in place by Republicisti, together with the impulse of the expansionist policy of Louis XIV in the Low Countries and in the Mediterranean, facilitate the return of good relations between the Hispanic monarchy and Genoa. The desire of Louis XIV to externalize the full autonomy of the Kingdom of France with respect to the mercantile republic result in the implementation of an aggressive policies that culminate in 1672 with the invasion of the United Province and the Republic of Genoa, a position diametrically opposed to that adopted by the Spanish monarchy that regard with suspicion the advance of the sovereignty models sponsored by France within that republic and that continue to be dependent for its functioning on the naval and financial resources offered by them. The Spanish ambassador in Den Haag, Francisco Manuel de Lira, expressed this categorically when, in 1672, faced with the simultaneous invasion of the Ligurian and Dutch republics, he pointed out to his colleague in Genoa, the Marquis of Vil García, quiera Dios que tengan buena salida de esta borrasca y que en lo que se ha movido en este país no se verifique que es año climatérico de las repúblicas, pues depende en gran parte hoy nuestra salud de su conservación. Despite the effort of the Habsburg to present themselves as the main support of the autonomy of the republican systems menaced by France, they could not avoid the French bombardment of San Remo and San Pierre d'Arena in 1678, prelude of the diplomatic and military offensive directed to break the ties that still bound the Republic to the Catholic monarch. In 1682, Versailles sent its first permanent resident to Genoa, thus breaking the monopoly that the Spanish ambassador had exercised until then, and his exclusive access to the complex decision-making mechanism of the Genoese government. The rejection of the Republic to accept the demands of the French ambassador, Saint-Olon, was materialized in a massive bombardment of the city by the French fleet in May 1684, about which Emilio Pérez Blanco will speak to us in this Congress. The dispatch of the large military contingent by the Spanish government in Milan was proof that the link between the Hispanic monarchy and the Republic were still very close, but they could not prevent the Duke from being forced to humiliate himself in Versailles before Louis XIV the following year. As part of his policy of public submission of the freedom of the urban republics, the King of France has proceeded to the bombardment 2 years before of the city of Algiers, and would do the same with some of the main cities of a monarchy of urban republic, such as the Hispanic monarchy, as evidenced by the bombardment of Brussels in 1695 and Barcelona in 1697, or the sacking at the same year of the city of Cartagena de Indias. The outbreak of the war of succession after the death of Charles II in 1700 and the dynastic confrontation between Habsburg and the Bourbon expressed the clash between the two antagonistic models of sovereignty. In this context, the Republic of Genova adopted a position of neutrality, but the most important families of Genoese aristocracy remained loyal to the new Bourbon dynasty, which was considered the most capable of avoiding the disintegration of a Hispanic imperial network where they enjoyed lucrative rents and feuds. Not in vain, the fourth Marquis de los Balbases, Felipe Spinola Colonna, held the position of the Viceroy of Sicily until the 1713, the last of the territories that the Spanish monarchy retained in Europe. His attitude will be imitated by the rest of the most influential Genoese family, as evidenced by the fact that the Duke of Tursis was inclined to put his powerful private squadron in the Mediterranean under the command of Philip V. Families such as the Mari, the Grillo, the Doria, or the Spinola, who expropriate from a large part of their feudal domains in the Italian domains of the crown due to the defeat of the Bourbons, will act as one of the main resorts for the recovery of the Spanish position in Italy during the 18th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Herrero Sánchez. I think that this was a really interesting, wide, important lecture. I just want to underline a little bit some points which are very important. Thank you very much for this perfect retrospective on the bibliography on Genoa, on many historical studies. I think that many very interesting points emerged from your lecture, from this importance of the mercantile, of the economical, of the financial and navalist element, which interacts with the political aspects, from this idea of the storia privatistica, of the history of Genoa made by the history of families. Then is very interesting point. I think that is something that we will have to discuss about this anti-Genoese view in Spain, this view of Genoa as a bloodsucker of Spain, and this wonderful text by Quevedo that are very interesting, and is accuses to the Republic of Genoa, to the system of Republic of Genoa, which perfectly matches, as you have shown us, to the criticism of the Republicisti, such as Andrea Spinola. They perfectly agree. And in the end, I think that this is really, you got to the core, to the heart of our project when you talk about the idea of full sovereignty, the problem with stating the full sovereignty in the Republic, and then this wonderful comparison of two different sovereignty models from France to Spain, with this idea of freedom of the urban republic against the submission, the order of submission. Thank you very much. It was a really very beautiful lecture. I think we will have a lot to discuss, but I would like to postpone the discussion of the keynote lectures at the end of the second lecture, which is made by Professor Matthias Schnettger. I would like to introduce him very briefly. He is full professor of early modern history at the Johannes Gutenberg Universität Mainz. He has been also lecturer and researcher at the University of Gießen, at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe Universität Frankfurt, and at the Deutsche Historische Institute in Rome. His research focuses mainly on the history of empire, and especially Imperial Italy. history of early modern small states in Italy and Germany, and the international relations and transfer processes in early modern Europe. He is author of several very important papers on early modern Genoa and Italy. Among them, let me cite at least the collections L'impero e l'Italia nella prima modernità, 2006, edited with Marcello Verga, Libertà e dominio, il sistema politico genovese, le relazioni esterne e il controllo del territorio, edited in 2011 with Carlo Taviani, and his major monographic work, very important for this conference, Principe Sovrano oder Civitas Imperialis, a very important book published in 2006 on the relationship between Genoa and the empire between the 16th and the 18th century. It's a real pleasure and an honor to welcome here Professor Matthias Schnettger, who will give us today a lecture titled Camera et Civitas Nostra Imperialis, the Republic of Genoa in the Imperial Perspective. Thank you very much, Professor Schnettger, for having accepted our invitation. I give you the floor.
Many thanks for the invitation and the very kind introduction. My lecture outlines the relationship of the Republic of Genoa to the Emperor and Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries. With an
I'm sorry, Professor, we cannot hear you. Maybe there's some issue with the microphone.
I hope. Better now?
Yeah, perfect.
I've got different microphones and I have to try. Thank you.
Don't worry. Sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, many thanks. And many thanks for the invitation and the very kind introduction. And I will restart. My lecture outlines the relationship of the Republic of Genoa to the Emperor and Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries, with an emphasis on the imperial perspective. It is divided into three sections. The first one deals with Genoa's relationship with the Emperor and Empire in the 16th century and outlines how differently both sides interpreted their legal relationship, but generally ignored this discrepancy in a dissimulating manner. I will illustrate this contrast with the conflict over Finale after 1558. The second section turns into the 1630s, when the Genoese aspirations to grant full sovereignty or respectively equality with the European monarchies led to a substantial change in the imperial Genoese relations. The very short third section attempts a brief summary. First chapter, the Republic of Genoa and the Holy Roman Empire since the reign of Charles V. While in the late Middle Ages, the relations between Genoa and the Holy Roman Empire had loosened, a certain rapprochement took place during the reigns of Maximilian I and especially of Charles V. Maximilian in 1496 granted a diploma in favor of the Republic, which confirmed every privilege Genoa had ever received on the part of the Holy Roman Emperor or King. With a second diploma, issued in 1513, Maximilian confirmed the pretended Genoese monopoly on the salt trade in the Ligurian Sea. However, only in 1528, when Andrea Doria changed over from Francis I of France to Emperor Charles V, the relations between the Republic and the Holy Roman Empire changed fundamentally. With his reign, the long-lasting affiliation of the Republic to the Spanish Empire began, but also the relationship of Genoa with the Holy Roman Empire was consolidated notably. Charles V confirmed the Genoese privileges and possessions in Liguria even more generously than Maximilian I, with 3 diplomas of 1529 and 1536 towards the Camera et Civitas Nostra Imperialis Genoa. Indeed, Genoa was usually addressed as Civitas Imperialis in every imperial diploma or letter of this period, which clearly stated a supremacy of the emperor and the empire. Hence, the freedom of Genoa was the same freedom which the German imperial cities possessed, a freedom to regulate their own affairs independently, but all under the emperor's supremacy. According to this view, Genoa not only owed the imperial respect and obedience, but was also subject to his jurisdiction. The Genoese understanding of their own freedom and the relationship of the Republic with the Emperor and the Empire was completely different. According to their position, the freedom of the Republic was not limited by any temporal authority. As the highest secular ruler of Christendom, the Emperor deserved respect, but he was not recognized as overlord of Genoa. Both sides were aware of this divergence, especially since neither the Emperor and the Empire nor the Republic of Genoa were in a position to assert their view of the mutual legal relationship. Both sides tended to dissimulate. They ignored the view of the other side as if their own position was undisputed. However, in certain situations, the Republic was forced to slip into the role of an imperial city if it aspired certain imperial privileges or graces. The three diplomas of Charles V and the one of Maximilian I, which confirmed the Genoese monopoly of the salt trade, formed in a certain manner the basis of the relationship between Genoa and the Holy Roman Empire. These four privileges were so important to the Genoese government that it asked each new emperor for their confirmation and usually received it. In addition to these privileges, the Republic also received investments in the imperial fiefdoms which Genoa acquired over time. Thus, from an imperial point of view, the Republic of Genoa was in a double legal relationship with the emperor and the empire. Genoa was an imperial city, and for her imperial fiefdoms, she was an imperial vassal. In the conflict over the Margraviate of Finale, the descent over the status of the Republic within or vis-à-vis the empire became obvious. Since the Middle Ages, Finale had been one of the Republic of Genoa's expansion targets. When in 1558 the subjects of Finale revolted against the Marchese Alfonso II del Caretto, the Republic forced him to sign an armistice treaty. Among others, he had to leave the fortress of Castelfranco to the Republic. Alfonso, however, revoked his agreement and traveled to the imperial court to defend his cause. He directed his accusations against the Republic, whose plans to seize Finale were a manifest violation of the emperor's feudal supremacy. Emperor Ferdinand I revoked the treaty of 1558 and, by decree of the 15th May 1559, Tanquam Imperator et Feudi Dominus, claimed jurisdiction in the case. He rejected the Genoese proposal to entrust the decision of the case to arbitrators to be appointed by himself in the Republic. If the Republic itself were not under the supremacy of the empire, this might have been a way out. However, Genoa was designated in imperial privileges as, cito, Nostra et Sacri Imperii Camera et Civitas Genuae, possessed many imperial fiefs, and ought the restoration of its freedom to Charles V. The proposal would lead the emperor to suspect that Genoa was trying to escape from the empire, thus taking the path not only of iniquity, but also of the greatest ingratitude. The Genoese were not inclined at all to recognize the imperial jurisdiction, even when Ferdinand modified his position insofar as he declared his willingness to allow settlement negotiations at his court. However, the Genoese representative Ottaviano Di Negro refused to answer on behalf of the Republic before the Imperial Court Commission, because he asserted that it had first to be clarified whether Finale was an imperial fief at all. Subsequently, the Finale affair transformed into a conflict between Genoa and the emperor. In the end, no longer just a question of the imperial jurisdiction over Finale was at stake, but rather that of the freedom of Genoa herself. The Genoese collegi themselves emphasized this point in a letter to the emperor in January 1560. Their representative, Di Negro, went even further when in March 1560 he presented a memorandum which, in the strongest terms possible, protested against all measures taken by the emperor that could lead to the prejudicium liberi status of the Republic and declared them annulled. Ferdinand first rejected the memorial and had it returned to Di Negro. Finally, on the 13th of March 1561, an imperial judgment in contumaciam was passed against Genoa, which rejected the treaty between Alfonso II and the Republic as forced and ordered the latter to return the Margraviate to Del Carretto. In this way, Ferdinand put into practice his position that Genoa was an imperial city and thus under the emperor's jurisdiction. However, the Signoria did not submit to the imperial judgment. Rather, it refused to accept the imperial letter and had its bearer expelled. Ferdinand reacted to this manifest disregard for his imperial dignity by seeking to implement an imperial execution against the Republic. Since he had no forces of his own in Italy, he assigned the execution to Philip II of Spain. But the Spanish king treated the imperial request dilatorily, so that Ferdinand finally sent the imperial herald John Frankel into Genoa to proclaim new imperial patrons. However, the herald had to leave Genoa without having achieved anything, and according to his own testimony, at the risk of his life. Ferdinand took the events as a further manifest disregard for his imperial dignity. Finally, Philip II sent a special envoy to Vienna to mediate a settlement between Ferdinand and the Republic. In 1563, the following conditions were agreed. Genoa submitted herself to the emperor's judgment as dominos directus of Finale and returned the Margraviate to Del Carretto. On the contrary, the even more delicate question of the emperor's jurisdiction over Genoa herself was left in limbo by the declaration that neither the imperial judgment on the one hand, nor their non-acceptance by the Republic on the other, nor the restitution of Finale or any other event connected with this dispute would affect any right of the empire or of Genoa, but that everything would remain as it had been at the time of Charles V. In the spring of 1564, an epilogue of the affair took place, which is very illuminating for the perception of the Republic at the imperial court. The dispute concerned the wording of the imperial decree announcing the settlement of the Finale conflict. The following passage in the decree was offensive from a Genoese perspective. The Republic and Camera Imperialis of Genoa could have put an end to the lengthy discussions and excuses long ago if it had obeyed to the imperial judgment as she should have done. Since it was not possible to undo what had happened, however, and since the Republic had now obeyed the imperial order, the emperor, through the intercession of Philip II, had graciously decided to grant her the punishment she deserved for her disobedience, to absolve her from her transgressions, and to accept her once again to the imperial grace. The Genoese considered this decree to be highly dangerous, as it was an infringement of the freedom of the Republic, which the settlement had been intended to repel. The complaints of the Genoese orator had a counterproductive effect. A second imperial decree was issued, which confirmed the first one. The new decree made it clear that Ferdinand had never doubted the services. Made it clear that Ferdinand had never doubted the services in favor of the emperor, the empire, and the House of Austria, which the Republic had repeatedly rendered. However, Genoa, in her capacity as Civitas Imperii, had been rewarded for her services with extensive privileges, rights, freedoms, and graces. Ferdinand had been prepared to follow the example of his predecessors, but then the Republic had violated the name and dignity of the emperor and the empire not only by occupying Finale, but particularly with a disregard for the imperial envoy and the imperial herald. Therefore, Ferdinand felt himself obliged to protect the rights, honor, authority, and jurisdiction of the empire. The first decree could not be cashed under any circumstances, as it in no way contradicted the settlement reached. The emperor had never intended to harm the Genoese liberty, but if the Republic wished to protect its liberty, it should be careful not to give the impression that, on the pretext of this liberty, it was violating the name, dignity, and authority of the emperor and the empire. With the submission of the Republic, Ferdinand first achieved a notable success. This does not mean, however, that he succeeded in establishing once and for all the imperial superiority he claimed over the Republic of Genoa. On the contrary, the status quo ante was in principle restored. The question of the imperial superiority over Genoa remained open, and both sides had maintained their respective positions. Second chapter, the 1630s as a turning point. In the Genoese history, the 1630s represent a decade of Renaissance. At least the so-called Republicisti aspired to the rebirth of the Republic's greatness. An important element of this revival was the consolidation of the Genoese liberty. The Republicisti were not only concerned to free the Republic from the dependence on Spain, but also to make clear its complete freedom from any temporal authority. Meanwhile, the concept of sovereignty had become established for this kind of freedom. But the Genoese striving for sovereignty was also connected with a shock to the hierarchy of the European powers. At that time, Pope Urban VIII Barberini issued a decree with which he wanted to secure the rank of the cardinals. According to this decree, the cardinals were to follow directly the kings in rank, but precede all other princes. By placing the cardinals, so to speak, between the kings and the non-royal princes and powers, the latter were implicitly devalued in rank. This papal decision had a considerable impact beyond Rome, so that the non-royal powers, including Genoa, had to fear the most damaging consequences for their position in the hierarchy of the European princes and powers. The courts and governments concerned were left with only one option to avert the damage: they had to become royal. In Genoa, the efforts to secure the royal rank of the Republic met with the efforts of the Republicisti to renew the Republic's greatness. In 1637, several decisions were taken and implemented in rapid succession to secure the royal rank for the Republic and to remove any semblance of foreign sovereignty. In March 1637, the Blessed Virgin was crowned Queen of Genoa and Liguria. In November, the new Doge, Agostino Pallavicino, was crowned as the first Genoese Doge with a royal crown. Some accompanying measures deserve special mention in our context. In particular, the old inscription Conradus Rex on the Genoese coins, which referred to the privilege of minting issued by King Conrad III, was replaced by the image of the Blessed Virgin as Queen of Liguria. However, in order to secure the royal rank of the Republic, it was crucial that it was also recognized by the other powers. And here the emperor played a most important role, for it was above all his claims to supremacy that stood in the way of Genoese sovereignty. The adoption of royal rank by the Republic of Genoa coincided with the death of Emperor Ferdinand II and the accession of his successor, Ferdinand III, to the throne in 1637. It was customary for Genoa to send a high-ranking ambassador to congratulate the new head of the emperor and at the same time to obtain for the Republic the confirmation of the imperial privileges and investitures by the new emperor. With Giambattista Negrone, the Republic also sent an ambassador to the imperial court in 1638, who was able to rely on the long-time resident at the imperial court, Girolamo Verdino. It was nothing new that questions of rank and ceremonial also played an important role in such legations. Against the background of the Genoese increase in rank, however, they were of particular importance because if Genoa was of royal rank, her ambassador had to be received with royal honors. With regard to the renewal of the investitures with the imperial fiefs of the Republic, continuity was observed. The resident Verdino asked for them and received them on behalf of the Republic in 1638. On the contrary, for the first time, the Republic did not ask for the confirmation of all the imperial privileges. In fact, as early as 1637, the resident Verdino had declared himself in favor of asking only for the renewal of the two privileges, which confirmed in general terms to the Republic all the privileges, rights and possessions dependent on the empire. On the other hand, Verdino judged the renewal of Maximilian's privilege of 1513 on the salt trade, and especially that of Charles V of 1st November 1536 to be unnecessary, because in his opinion, the latter only contained the confirmation of the Genoese liberty, which did not need further confirmation. The Signoria followed his recommendation. Hence, a fundamental change in the Genoese attitude to the imperial privileges is evident. They were no longer seen as advantages, but as a potential interference with Genoese liberty. For the moment, the Genoese did not even bother to have the privileges confirmed at all. In contrast to this, in preparation of Negrone's legation, the resident Verdino asked for a change in the emperor's title to the Republic and for the royal honors to be granted to the Genoese ambassador. An advisory on the Genoese claims issued by the Imperial Aulic Council in April 1638 is of greatest interest to our question. While a minority of the councillors were of the opinion that the wishes of the Republic should be met in something, but salva superioritate majestatis Caesareae et sacri Romani imperi, the majority felt that one could not wonder enough that Genoa was making such unseemly demands aimed at her total exemption from the empire. Both parties agreed that the Republic should continue to be regarded as a state and member of the empire. This would be supported by the term Civitas et Camera Imperialis, the signing of letters addressed to the emperor by the Genoese government as devotissimi, the granting and confirmation of the imperial privilege, the fact that the emperors continued to exercise their jurisdiction over Genoa, and the image of King Conrad on the Genoese coins. The majority felt that the emperor would renounce his supremacy if he changed the title of Genoa in the desired manner. The improvements concerning the title granted by former emperors were not admitted as an argument. The claim to parity or even priority over Venice was rejected. While the Venetians also enjoyed the royal treatment at the papal and other courts, the Genoese had only received it from France, the enemy of the emperor and the empire, obviously in odium et emulationem imperii. The argument that the Genoese Doge, unlike the Venetian, was not elected for life but only for 2 years and then was private again, was also important. In the final analysis, the councillors judged the Genoese approach to be close to a crimen lese majestatis. Accordingly, the majority vote was in favor of completely rejecting the request for a change of the Genoese title. This vote shows, on the one hand, that the Imperial Aulic Council had clearly recognized the direction of the Genoese innovations in ceremonial matters, and on the other hand, its determination to maintain the supremacy of the Emperor and the Emperor over Genoa. Ferdinand largely followed the majority vote of the Imperial Aulic Council when he decided to give a negative reply to the Genoese resident. Thus, the hope that the ambassador Negroni could move into Vienna with all the royal honors was not fulfilled. Even during his stay in Vienna, neither he nor the resident Verdino managed to achieve a breakthrough on the question of the title and ceremonial to be granted to the Republic. After Negroni's departure, a further scandal occurred when, in June 1638, an imperial decree was issued in which Ferdinand III not only rejected the Genoese demands for ceremonial revaluation of the Republic, but also qualified the Republic again as Civitas Imperialis, a title which was no longer acceptable for the Genoese. As a result, the resident Verdino refused to accept this decree. Genoa's action on the question of privileges caused irritation at the imperial court too. Shortly before his departure, Negroni finally asked for confirmation of the true privileges of the 29th June of 1529 and of the 10th of November of 1536. In this matter, the Imperial Aulic Council avoided an open conflict. He informed Verdino that if he wished to have the privileges confirmed, he would have to submit a new memorial to the Imperial Aulic Council based on the model of the previous ones. In August 1638, the leading imperial minister Maximilian von Trautmannsdorf explained to the Genoese resident how irritated the imperial court was at the fact that the confirmation of the privileges had not been requested in the usual manner, and that this irritation was preventing any concessions on the questions of the title. As a result, the Signoria revised its position, and Verdino presented a new memorial in which he requested the renewal of all 4 privileges. But only in 1640, the negotiations started moving again, not because one side had changed its views, but because the Genoese side has changed its strategy. In view of the enormous financial requirements of the imperial court in the final phase of the 30 Years' War, attempts were made to achieve the desired concessions as an act of imperial grace with a substantial sum of money. Ferdinand III set up a small deputation of councillors in 1640 to discuss this offer and the Genoese affairs in general. Apparently, the emperor took this path because he expected greater flexibility from these handpicked councillors than from the entire Imperial Aulic Council. In March 1604, the deputation submitted its report. The councillors saw a change in favor of the Republic in comparison to spring 1638, and the fact that, since then, it has recognized its initial mistake to such an extent that it has ceased to penetrate its demands as a legal title and has also accepted this submission to the Holy Roman Empire. On the contrary, it would now so fervently seek the grace from your imperial majesty. Thus, the most important reasons for which the Imperial Audit Council had advised the emperor against granting the Genoese requests at the time were no longer valid. However, the councillors still regarded the arbitrary acceptance of the royal insignia and the changes to the coins as problematic. It would be desirable that the Genoese repair the usurpation committed before granting the requested imperial graces. This would, however, be difficult to enforce. Moreover, it was to be feared that, since one wanted to seriously continue the shown severity, the Republic might be seduced to even more dangerous decisions. Above all, Genoa had shown her willingness to grant the emperor the due gratitude and appropriate devotion, and could well offer a considerable benefit. Accordingly, the councillors recommended that the Genoese wishes should be met in something, however, in such a way that the supremacy of your imperial majesty and of the emperor is confirmed and no one else is prejudiced. Specifically, they proposed to use the following address in the future writings to Genoa. Serenissimo Duci et gubernatoribus republicae nostrae Genuensis. The title Serenissimus would put the Republic on an equal footing with the higher ranks, while the word Nostrae would confirm the imperial supremacy. The councillors saw this formula at the outermost limit of the imperial concession. Since the Republic would only offer considerable payments if all her wishes were granted, the councillors also recommended that all Genoese privileges should be confirmed. By following this advice, the emperor's basic decision in favor of Genoa was made. However, only in autumn 1641, the negotiations were finally concluded. The decree in which Ferdinand III, with reference to the amplitudo and gloria of Genoa, her merit towards the empire and the House of Austria, and in particular the egregium subsidium pecuniarium provided in the present wartime period, and the example set by his predecessors as Roman emperors, stipulated that the Republic was to receive the following address from him and his successors in word and writing in future. Serenissimo Duci Principi nostro carissimo ac illustribus gubernatoribus Republicae Genuensium nostris dilectis. In contrast to this, the desired royal honors were not granted to the Republic. Although the deputized councillors and other decision makers at the imperial court worthy emphasized that this improvement of the title granted to the Genoese Republic did not detract from the supremacy of emperor and empire of the city and Republic of Genoa, it did so, of course, and should do so from a Genoese perspective. In fact, the emperor now accepted what only a few years before had been castigated as Genoese arbitrariness, yes, even crime of majesty against the emperor. Indeed, by renouncing the Civitas Nostra Imperialis in the correspondence with the Republic, the emperor substantially weakened his own legal position. However, neither he nor his ministers did abandon it at all. My conclusion. Ultimately, the question of Genoa's position vis-à-vis the emperor and the empire remained an open question throughout the early modern period. In the 16th century, the opposing Genoese and imperial views were still somewhat concealed under the relatively open concept of liberty. After the Republic had explicitly insisted on its sovereignty and royal rank since the 1630s, this became much more difficult. The imperial institutions and the imperial jurists persistently held on the idea that Genoa was an imperial city. However, this view increasingly appeared to be more of a mere fiction. which also lost credibility because the Habsburg Emperor himself, when he did not act as head of the empire, but as representative of his dynasty or as ruler of the great power of Austria, treated Genoa de facto as a sovereign, albeit not royal power. The longer, the more, the view of the imperial jurists and institutions fell out of time. As a latent threat, however, it remained a source of concern for the Republic of Genoa to the very end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Schnettger. Very, very interesting lecture full of very interesting topics. I think that the first part was really a thorough lecture of this relationship between Genoa and the empire, with this idea of very well articulated of the reach for liberty and the contrast with this idea of possess of civitas imperialis and the conflict. The idea of ingratitude is also very interesting. Then I think that all of both your lectures really focus on the problem of negotiating political identity in a republic such as Genoa, because also the second part, which was very, very interesting, all on the question of the when the question of the imperial superiority on Genoa remained open, is very important in order to understand how important was, how fundamental was for Genoa to claim its royal status. It's not by chance that they really insist on this point, and also the first relation point out this very well. Both of the two relations point out the great importance of the idea of Queen Mary in 1637 as a turning point for the imagination and the representation of the Republic of Genoa, with this stress on the royal status, on the royal rank. And we are not talking about, you, Professor Schnettger, show it very well, we are not just talking about ideology, about something that is really abstract, but of very, very concrete questions of political. There's a problem of embassy. There's a real concrete political matters, such as in the knowledge of the title of Genoa. And it was really fascinating what you show about with your research, thorough research on the real documents, on this change, progressive change of the title, the way to address to the Republic of Genoa. I think that was really, really interesting and important lecture that adds some very, very special points to our research. Thank you very much. I think that we can immediately open the discussion. I'm sure that there will be a lot of answers. Anyone can take the word. I just ask you or to use the option raise hand, and we will give you the word, or just write with the chat that you have on Zoom to Alessandro Metlica. We will collect all the questions and then give the voice to who has requested it. So please, the discussion is open.
So maybe I break the ice, also giving us all the time to write down some questions on chat. And of course, this is not the best way to have a discussion, but let me say once again, thank you. Two very, very fascinating lectures, and I would have a lot of questions, but I would start by a more generic suggestions. Maybe it's not really a question, and it's mainly addressed to Professor Sánchez, but maybe also Professor Schnettger could elaborate on that. Of course, I'm very, very interested by this idea of a polycentric structure in not only in Spanish monarchy, but more broadly in the early modern states. this idea of a fragmentation, the role played by local agents, urban identities. I do think that it's a very useful idea, even as with regard to my case studies, that is the Republic of Venice, this idea of a more complicated social reality is essential if we really want to understand what's going in there. But so my question is this: of course, not of course, but in an economical perspective, such as the one you showed to us, I think that this idea of a polycentric structure proves to be very concrete, as Enrico also has just said, because we really see how things are evolving and the different actors interacting. And as far as political and diplomatic practices are concerned, of course, we are on a very different level, but once again, we can see this interaction in a very concrete way. But from my point of view, so I'm talking of the cultural production, it's really difficult to abandon the idea of a center producing the culture and then spreading it all around. If we look, for example, at Venice, as far as concerns both the literature, but also the ceremonial practices, we have this idea of a ceremonial city fixed at the center of the Republic, and then spreading the results of this cultural production. So I don't know, I said that it's not a proper question, but I do think that this model of a more polycentric structure is very, very interesting. So maybe you can elaborate on that also with regard to, the European situation around Genova.
Maybe we can collect also another question that we have by Matteo Casini. Matteo, please.
We cannot hear you, Matteo.
Yes, hello everybody. Hello to George in particular. They didn't see in a long time. George Gorse, how are you? And yes, my question is actually related to a different problem. You want to go ahead or you want to discuss it after? Because I was mostly interested in another topic. I was not following this one. I was opening a new subject. You want me to do it now anyway, or? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, maybe we can have now we can Professor Herrero, Sánchez, and then Professor Schnettger answer to the first question of Alessandro, and then so pass to another subject.
Opening a new subject, yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
I speak. Thank you, Alessandro, for your consideration and for the interest of the polycentric model that is on the center of our research and our research team now. No, is evident for the economic point of view, or for a question like, for instance, the galley system of particular on Genova is completely evident of this model. No, but I understand maybe for cases like Venice, or maybe also for Genoa, this model is not working perfectly. Even if in Venice also there is a strong autonomy of the territories in the terra firma and also in the different colonies. But at least for the case of the Spanish monarchy, there is not a single center of production of model of behavior, of model of protocols. It's true that the center is in Madrid, but Madrid has no real control about what's happening, for instance, in Mexico or in Naples or in Milano. And it's also very interesting to show that in this sense is one of the ideas I want to point out strongly, the idea that was external agent from the monarchy, like the Genoese, that were essential in the creation of this this representation, even of the monarchy, or even of the power of the monarchy, of the culture of this very complex structure of monarchy. I don't think the model, the representation of the elites in the Spanish monarchy was something just provenances from Castile, the center of the system, the theoretical center of the system. And it's completely evident there is a fusion between Flemish, between Italian, and even with a lot of elements from America in the creation of a model of representation and a model of behavior that is more cosmopolitan and is more hybrid that from one exact center. And that is completely evident when the French begin to impose a new mode of culture, or a new mode of representation in the second part of the 17th century, because this influence of the French that came, for instance, in Spain through the representation in the Low Countries, or through Italy, or through the governor or embassies in the other territories, even if Madrid tried to avoid it, even if Madrid put a lot of laws against this diffusion of this culture. So that is an evidence for me, very that the model of a state nation of full sovereignty, at least for the Spanish monarchy during the 16th and 17th century, is not working very well.
Yes, I think that the same is the same thing for the Holy Roman Empire, and because also the Holy Roman Empire has a polycentric structure. Perhaps it is the polycentric empire par excellence, because there's the imperial court, the imperial diet, the capitals of the several principalities, the imperial cities, and each single government in the empire had its own politics and all their own publicity, and that means that the public of the empire, the public sphere of the empire, is a very complex, and it has been studied in the last 2 decades very intensely.
Thank you.
Okay, so if Matteo, if you are here, if you want to do your question now. I can't see him.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry. First of all, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much to Enrico and Alessandro for organizing this very, very interesting, already started, has been as a very interesting meeting. And I am particularly attracted as a Venetian scholar, of course, by the theme of royalty that was touched by Professor Schnettger, that I thanks so much for this very stimulating lecture, because of course this is a basic theme that we can find in Venice as well. In the same period, there was a similar division among the Venetian patriciate about defending the island of Crete, of Candia, because the island of Crete could actually provide a title of royalty to the Republic of Venice. And of course, as you all know, the Savoy of Turin were bringing the same claim about Cyprus. And in fact, they were, fighting with Venice around the island of Cyprus, which was also another island that could bring the title of royalty. This is a very interesting theme on which the Italian small states are competing, as Roberto Resco has shown in the famous, very interesting article some time ago. And it relates to the fact that those small Italian states have not a direct power directly given by God, as the great sovereigns like the French kings, the English kings, and the Pope. And this is creating, since the Middle Ages, a difficult situation, because their powers is always derived from someone else, from a higher authority. you know. And if you think about the Ferrara, the Modena, the Mantua little dynasties received the feudal title from the emperors, you know, and so that this is a big problem. That is, you know, if you think about the Medici, you know, willing to have a Grand Duke title in the 16th century to overpass the original Duke title of Duke, which was lower, and this is provoking a lot of protest from other people and so forth. So the problem of royalty is very interesting. I would like to ask you if you can say something a little more about, especially this coronation that I heard, if I heard well, about the Doge, is really dealing with the essence of power of these little states and their difficulties in front of higher powers. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's really thank you for the question, and I think it's really an important topic for the international or interstatal relations in the 17th century and also the early 17th century, 18th century, sorry, because with the 1630s, with the papal decree of 1630 of Urban the 8th, there is indeed a gap between the royal powers and the non-royal powers becomes more obvious. And there's a second step. It's the Congress of Peace of Westphalia in the 1640s, and there a clear difference becomes obvious between the royal powers and the non-royal powers. Who is granted full sovereignty? The royal honors, and there are several Italian princes and the German electors who are striving for the full royal power, but have very great difficulties in reaching it. They're granted some honors, but never the full royal powers. And in order to this, they are often treated with disregard, even at the following peace congresses, for perhaps at Nimwegen, at Reichswijk. And so also the German electors, the secular electors, try to achieve the royal crown. The elector of Brandenburg achieves this with the Kingdom of Prussia. The elector of Saxony achieves this with August, Frederick August being elected King of Poland. The elector of Hanover achieves it by being King of Great Britain in 1714. The elector of Bavaria has the chance to achieve it with the Spanish Empire, but the prince Joseph Ferdinand dies 2 years too early, and so Bavaria only gains the royal title in 1806. Also, it's a very important subject, and German scholars have found out that even for Prussia, the royal title was very important to become a great power in the 18th century. Perhaps it's similar to the case of Savoy with Sicily and then Sardinia.
Thank you very much. We have a question by Professor Herrero Sánchez also to Professor Schnettger, if you want to.
The question is related with this thing you are speaking now. and is related with the Congress of Westphalia in 1648, because I'm wondering the differences between the situation in the Dutch Republic and the Swiss Confederation, no? After this peace that theoretically is broke the links of jurisdiction with the empire. Thomas Meissen made that in some doubts. He told it's not really like this, because there are some cantons that still recognize the authority of the emperor, most of the weak cantons against the stronger one, no? But also is related with this clash between two different models of sovereignty, because France during the second part of the 17th century, following the model of the Dutch or the Swiss canton, the theoretical model, also broke the links of the territory they conquered in the Low Country with the emperor, the jurisdictional link, introduced these territories under the direct jurisdiction of France in a way completely different to this one taken by the Spanish monarchy that try, which is weak, and they needed looking for allies in the fences of the Low Country. They try to recover and to restore the importance of the circle of the Burgundy and the dependence of the Spanish king, at least for the territories of the Low Country, with the emperor in order to receive the alliance of that. I don't know if you can tell me some more information about this special situation of the Dutch country and Swiss Confederation that normally in the maps of the in the second part of the 17th century remain out of the imperial sovereignty.
Yeah, it's a very complex situation, especially I would say for the Swiss cantons, because each single canton has its own relationship with the emperor and the empire first, and there are two important steps. There's the time around 1500 when the Swiss Federation not takes over the new institution of the empire. They don't have a seat in the imperial diet, for example. They aren't subjected to the jurisdiction of the imperial courts, but they stay in a relationship with the empire, which is not very clear. In the Treaty of Westphalia, it's there's a paragraph which states that the exemption of the Swiss cantons from the empire. Exemption. Also, this word is not very clear. It means in the first part the exemption from the jurisdiction of the imperial courts, but then from gradually this Swiss cantons march out of the empire definitely, but you can also find in the late 17th century the imperial eagle in the cantons, which is left out only over time. For Holland, it's there's no legal separation from the empire, because the Republic of the Netherlands is not mentioned as being exempt in the Treaty of Westphalia. There's the treaty with Spain of January 1648, but not in the treaties with the Imperial Swedish and Imperial French treaty. But there are no claims of the empire on the Republic after this time. No real claims to be sure. There is a several theory that there is still there are still existing imperial rights, but that's no theme in the politics of the governments. And that's a difference to Italy, because there, especially in the 18th century, with the consolidation of Austria's power in Milan, there's a renaissance of the imperial jurisdiction in Italy.
Very interesting. I don't see any other question. We are a little bit late, but I would like to answer the last question before ending the session. I think that we can postpone the beginning of the second part, because I have a question for both of you, which is based on another concept, very important in your relations. One was that of the royalty, which has already been explored, thanks also to the question of Matteo. The other one, according to my opinion, is that of liberty. So the problem of liberty is really important and central to the constitution of the ideology of the republic, to the early modern republicanism. So it's something not so important, because all of you know, recall what Popper said about liberty, and in particular what Skinner said about liberty, analyzing the English case of the Interregnum during the Revolution and King's Mother and the Commonwealth government. So according to his opinion, when we talk about liberty in the English Republic, we are talking about a kind of negative liberty, which is liberty from any kind of subjection. It's very important, the contrast between Harrington and Hobbes that he recall about the Republic of Lucca and the Empire of Constantinople. He said that the poorest citizen of Lucca is more free, has more liberty than the Pasha of Constantinople, because the Pasha is only tenant of his head, is always dependent from the willness of his emperor. So I would just like to answer a question, because from your relation, what really interesting is something that emerged with great interest, is that we have a different conceptions of liberty here. Professor Schnettger stressed, talking about 1630, 1640, about that year, he stressed very much the attention on what is liberty for this kind of republicisti or generalist politician, which is autonomy from Spain, from France, autonomy from other institutions, and possibility to relaunch proper navalist economic politics. From the other hand, also Professor Herrero Sánchez said that also in the republicist view, there's not this kind of liberty in general. This is a liberty which is really limited to some noblemen, to some eminent citizen, and there are a mass of slaves also in Genoa. And this is also the accused from the Spain to the generalist politics. So I would like just to ask you if you can a little bit elaborate on this difference. I'm really convinced that you are your opinion is really the right one, and that we have to look at liberty not as something that is intellectual, is just described in the political pamphlet, but is something really central to the politics, to the economic of these republics. Did you find some other text that also testifies the Skinner's idea of liberty from dependence, liberty from servitude in the Republican text of Genoa? I think that something in Veneroso, for example, that has been cited, we can find something in Veneroso, but I think that is always not linked to the renewal of classical sources of the Roman Digestum of Titus Livius, but is something really linked to the concrete situation of the Genoese politics, for example, also in Brignole Sales text that Professor Herrero Sánchez mentioned. And I would like to ask you if you can see from this analysis on the different use of liberty, a strong difference between the Genoese Republic and the English Republic, or if you justify it with other ways that kind of Skinner research. Maybe also Skinner has highlighted only some sources in order to stress the accent on another kind of liberty. But I think that in the text that I found, that I analyzed on 17th century Genoese literature, political literature, I've never really found this kind of Skinner's interpretation of pure liberty in Genoese Republican writings. But I would like to ask you a little bit more analysis. Thank you.
I agree with you, Alessandro. Scusa, Zucchi, for this appreciation, because I really think we have to reconsider very strongly the operative model of the republicanism by Skinner, that is not really well suited for the cases of the Genoese Republic, but also for the case of the Spanish monarchy or the different territories under the jurisdiction of the Catholic king, that also use very strongly the term of liberty. They are all the time taking this down, and even there is a lot of text, mostly from neo-scholastics and all these kind of people. I'm thinking about, for instance, Francisco Suarez, or I was thinking about Vázquez de Menchaca, do insist on the importance of the king to respect the liberty of the different body of the different jurisdiction under his sovereignty, because for them that is really one of the key elements of the stability of the system. In confront of other kind of model of sovereignty, more kind of this one of Bodin, or this one of the French with the second part of the 17th century, that want to stress really the control of the king in the top of the pyramid. For them, this concept of liberty is essentially the respect of the different body of the different corporation that compose the republic. And in this sense, for them is essential, and they are very proud to show internationally as the defender of the liberty of the republic. That is the title of the king, the Catholic king, normally used for the Republic of Genoa. And there is a lot of exchange of letters between the different ministers of the Spanish government in Italy and Spain and in the Low Country. I'm thinking, for instance, in this moment, in the Duke of Alba, that insists very strongly on the necessity to never incorporate the territory of Genoa inside of the jurisdiction of the Spanish monarchy, and to maintain always the liberty of the Republic, because this is more productive and is better for the autonomy or for the interlink relation between them. Another question is the theme of some particular, these eminenti, that are really broken this liberty of the Republic in a sense, because they act, as Quevedo told, as different republic, each of them. That is obsession, this critique of this kind of aristocratic model of government that is perverse in the sense that transforming oligarchy and in some kind of element that is no good and must to be correct by other kind of element. In this sense, the eminenti are criticized not just by the Republicisti or inside of some autonomist groups in the Republic, but also inside of the Spanish monarchy, because they play this strange duality of fidelity between the Spanish monarchy, where there are grandes of Spain and they have a lot of titles and they can operate it, and at the same time to the other. But nevertheless, they always play this very fizzing and very confusing element, and was essential for a lot of element of the negotiation of the diplomatic sphere. In this sense, and answering to a question of Alessandro Metlica before, I try to remember for the Republican diplomatic system is not just essential the relation and the role of the ambassador of the Republic in Madrid, that is important, of course, but normally for a lot of questions is more important the role, for instance, of the ambassador in Milano or the consul in Naples, and not just them, also the role, the strange role played by these grandi, by these eminente, like Ambrosio Spinola, but mostly Filippo Spinola, Marqueses de los Balbases, the Spinola, where they normally act as mediator also of this in the political and in the diplomatic arena. Thanks.
Thank you. For Genoa, I have nothing to add. It was very, that was a very good answer by Manuel Herrero, but I may add something perhaps for the empire, because also for the Holy Roman Empire, liberty was a central concept. The German liberty, Deutsche Libertät, was often set in contrast with other political systems, with a Spanish servitude, or the monarchia, the monarchy in France. And if the emperor violated the liberties of the estates of the empire, he was accused of monarchy. So you have the concept of liberty. It's not only a liberty of republics, but also a liberty of complex empires. And in the same thing that, in the same way that Manuel Herrero described, each member of the empire has its right, his particular liberties, and these rights, liberties, freedoms have to be preserved by the emperor. When the emperor does so, he is a monarch in the good sense, as a protector and a judge, a good judge. And if he doesn't so, he is a monarch in the negative sense, a despotic monarch, and in consequence, not longer a legitimate monarch.
Thank you very much. It was very, very clear, very interesting answer. I really appreciated your explication. In effect, at the end of this first session of keynote speaker, we have achieved the objective of demonstrating, I think, that liberty is not a Republican concept, and probably royalty is not only monarchical concept. So it was really didactical, really interesting, and I think that we are all very, very happy to have you here as keynote speaker.